We're hesitant to believe that there might be supernatural things in the world. That seems a little bit irrational, a bit anti-scientific. It's a little bit of a stretch for logical, rational thinking people. And I'm reminded of the Sherlock Holmes films with Robert Downey Jr., where in these films lots of weird and wonderful things seem to happen, and then later on he explains how there is a natural explanation behind every single one of those. And I think we have this tendency to think that there must just be a natural explanation behind miraculous things. And yet, the Christian faith rests on one particular miracle, that Jesus rose bodily from the dead. And either this is true or it isn't. And so how do we navigate this area? And some of the ideas and objections to miracles actually came from a Scottish philosopher called David Hume, who was around in the 18th century, and he actually lived in this city of Edinburgh. And a couple of his objections to miracles are this. Firstly, miracles belong to a pre-scientific age. People in biblical times, of course they used to believe in miracles because they used to happen all the time and they didn't have science, so of course they did. Well, there's a couple of things we can say to that. Firstly, a man called Luke is one of the biographers of the life of Jesus, and he wrote Luke's gospel. Now, Luke was a physician who was trained in the medicine and the science of his day, and he wrote a highly detailed account, which as a scientist myself, I'm very encouraged by. There are details in that you think, Luke, seriously? You really need that level of detail? But, he really had a mind for that sort of thing. And yet, he doesn't seem to have a problem with miracles, and he talks about the virgin birth and the resurrection and how Jesus raised people from the dead and healed them of horrible things. And so Luke didn't seem to have a problem. He was a scientist. The second thing to say is that in biblical times, people didn't always believe that a miracle had happened. Even though Jesus had spent 3 years with his disciples, his followers, and told them that he was going to die and be raised again, at the empty tomb on that Easter Sunday, that first Easter Sunday, the disciples were stood there going, duh, what's happened? And actually the women who were there first tried to tell them, Jesus is raised from the dead, we've seen him. No, surely not. And in fact, one of those disciples, Thomas, asks for evidence. He asks for the same evidence that you and I are asking for today. And so it's simply not the case that miracles belong to a pre-scientific age. The same objections to miracles were raised in biblical times as today. The second objection that David Hume raised, or one of the others, is that miracles break the laws of nature. They somehow break or violate what science is telling us. Well, those of you that are scientists and are studying science will know actually the laws of nature, they describe what is happening. They don't prescribe once for all that this must always be the case. Now, to illustrate this, I have some chocolate. You're probably wondering why I've been holding some Cadbury's Heroes in my hand for the last 20 minutes. It's a bit sweaty now, I have to say. But I'm going to throw these out into the audience, and please react as you see fit. So what I'm trying to do there, and I'm really not very good at throwing, and I'm really better at underarm than overarm, so apologies for that. But what we're trying to say is that the laws of nature describe what happens most of the time, but that doesn't mean that you can't so the laws of nature describe that when I throw a sweet to you, that the mass of the sweet and the velocity at which it's traveling, and then you've got gravity acting upon that, they all describe what should happen. But that doesn't mean that you can't reach out your hand and grab that sweet and stop its journey through the air. And so the laws of nature are descriptive, they are not prescriptive. And the second thing we can say is you need the laws of nature to recognize the miraculous. And the children's author, C.S. Lewis, illustrates this with this example. Hands up if you've got a locker at school. Okay, quite a few of you. Imagine one day you go and in your locker you store not only your notes and books for the day, but you also put in there, I don't know, £50 because you're going to something later on in the evening. When you get back to your locker at the end of the day, there's only £20 there. What do you conclude? Do you conclude that the laws of mathematics have been broken? Or do you conclude that the laws of Scotland have been broken? It is precisely because the laws of mathematics are fixed and stable and unchanging that you're able to recognize there must be another explanation. Somebody must have come in from outside and done something. In other words, a thief. And more than that, the actions of the thief in no way contradict or cancel out the laws of mathematics. Rather, the laws of mathematics expose the actions of the thief. And this helps us as we understand miracles. You actually need the laws of nature to recognize a miracle. You need to know what normally happens in order to recognize when temporarily it doesn't. You need the natural in order to recognize the supernatural. You need the normal to recognize the paranormal. And what Luke tells us is that it is precisely because people do not normally get up from their graves and walk again that we are able to recognize the resurrection of Jesus as utterly unique in the whole of human history. Right at the heart of this question of miracles is this. Are you open to new ideas? I'm a scientist by training, and to be a good scientist, you have to be open to new ideas. What you do, you start with a hypothesis. You collect data. You see if the data agrees with the hypothesis. If it does, great, you're onto something. Collect some more data, see if that matches. But if the data does not agree with your starting hypothesis, you have to come back to the drawing board. You have to be open to new ideas to be a good scientist. Are you open to new ideas? Because if it is true that one man has uniquely risen from the dead and says that if we follow him, the same is true for us, then that's not simply a case of true for you but not for me. That's either true for all of us or none of us, and we can all go home and there's no need for reboot. Are you open to new ideas? And really the final thing to say on this is that the real question to be asking is not, is it crazy to believe in miracles, but in fact, does God exist? Because if God doesn't exist, no, miracles are not possible. We live in a closed system of cause and effect. There is always a natural explanation. But if God does exist, then he would be capable of making a world where there are laws of nature and also occasionally suspending those laws to do something extraordinary. And not because he meddles, but because he rescues. And the Christian story is of a God who has rescued, who has come down as Jesus to rescue. So it is not crazy to believe in miracles today. Thank you for listening.